Good morning and welcome back to our Ask the Agronomist Facebook Live. This is a little bit different being inside. I don't feel like I'm shouting.
Yeah, we chose the easier option.
Yeah, it is pretty cold out there.
Unfortunately, a lot of cold moved in overnight, the winds, and it kind of feels like wintertime already. So.
Yeah, it does. So how are things looking out there? I know not much has changed from last week.
Yeah, unfortunately, those weekly crop reports coming in, there really hasn't been much change in soybeans harvested or corn harvested. I know some guys were trying to get at some corn this last weekend, and it's just been a struggle all around for everybody. Muddy field conditions, and now it's getting cold, so still cloudy and cold, so not a lot of good things there. But the good thing is it's going to be dry. It looks like it's going to be dry. I know there's still snow in some parts, but hopefully this stuff moves past and we can get some crops out. So.
And we do have sunshine in the forecast.
Yes, it's supposed to be.
I mean, that is undeniable. Yeah.
It's sunny in here. So.
All right, sounds good. Well, today we're going to be talking about grain quality related to soybeans. We did a topic a few weeks ago on the corn side of things, but
so soybeans, so unfortunately with soybeans, we're seeing a lot of, and this is not from a low spot or a drowned out spot, so guys know what the drowned out spots. We're not necessarily talking about that. Those are kind of a loss unless your elevator has agreed to take some of those poorer quality beans, but those low spots may just have to be left like they were a few years ago. But in general, soybeans, they do really well. I mean, they're standing upright usually, and they've got a pod around them that helps kind of keep that seed somewhat dry and away from the elements. But in the case of extended rains, long drizzly days, dew and fog and all that stuff, it's just really put a challenge on soybeans here staying out in the field this long. Because a lot of them were done, mature under that 50% mark, they were ready to be harvested, dried down, and then they started taking moisture back up. So. The first thing I wanted to mention, we're going to talk about two things, disease and sprouting, because we talked about sprouting in corn a week or so ago. And sprouting in soybeans is typically not as much of a concern. So, I've talked about what it requires a soybean to germinate, right? It's over 50% of the seed has to be imbibed, in water.
Right.
So once it dries down to 13, like we probably had before, it's got to get back up to 50%, which is pretty unlikely. As long as the soybean plant's standing and the pods aren't open. Obviously, there can be exceptions to that, and it can get up, or if it's laying down, or the seed pods start to crack, things like that.
Right.
We do have some cold temperatures right now in certain parts that can add to some of that worry about seed pods cracking. So, in general, the germination part is not as big of an issue as soybeans, which is a good thing. So
and just back to the late season rain, that did help fill out a lot of the pods.
Yeah, I mean, I was really excited in August. We had rain upon rain, and even a little bit early September, given the late planted beans we had and stuff. If you're seeing mold, you're cracking open pods and seeing mold. That's the biggest takeaway, especially if you're thinking about storing it. That's I'll mention that in a second. That's not a good idea. But some of our common diseases, the ones we hear about, we've been getting reports of, is one that you're holding in your hand, and that's the Cercospora, or purple seed stain. So basically, what it looks like is the seed is stained. It's a purple color. Usually, sometimes you can see a pink or a pink to purple. It just depends. But all these ones that I'm mentioning can start out on the stem, can start out on the leaves, things like that, and then move eventually. But then they stay with the plant. So that's part of the management aspect we'll mention at the end too. Is these things are going to overwinter. It's on the residue now. It will be there for next year and years to come, depending what your tillage situation is. So the purple seed stain is a big one we've been hearing about. Another one is called phomopsis, which is typically a lot of guys will see that. Maybe you know what it looks like, maybe you don't. It's a lot of times the beans will be the normal size, but they may be a little bit puffed up, and they're usually kind of a chalky white appearance and wrinkled.
Okay.
So a lot of guys have probably seen that. That's a pretty common one. You know, another common one is one that I saw quite a bit in the leaves earlier was frog eye. This year was a pretty good year for frog eye leaf spot, given the amount of heavy dews we had in August and rain, like I said, kind of helped that disease spread in the upper canopy, and then you know, eventually move into the seeds. So that can cause a reddish brown in the seeds as well. All those are fungi. But you can also have other things like mold. So, you know, guys know white mold. You're going to see issues in the pods there. And even things like downy mildew and stuff can get in here and cause mold. So the biggest thing, you know, it's important to know what you have, obviously, so you can manage for it in the future. But the biggest thing is going out there and checking. You know, or if worse comes to worse, when we get going, you know, making sure you're looking and seeing what's coming into the tank. And making sure you make that decision on whether you're going to store it or not.
So depending on what you have in the field, how would you prioritize?
Yeah, so, you know, at this point, guys are going to be going after whatever they can. A lot of the beans, no matter what maturity, seems like most of them are pretty close to ready. So obviously go after the ones that are ready first and dried down first. You know, and if they do have, you know, if they're showing some issues like that, but they're not really moldy, if you're going to store them, you know, making sure they're dry. You know, a lot of guys may or may not put air on soybeans in a bin. You know, putting air on beans this year might be a good idea to make sure that they get that moisture level down. So, you know, because I know the co-ops have had signs and stuff out already, actually a month ago, you know, about moldy corns and so forth. So be aware of that. You don't want to get a load denied and that kind of thing. So, you know, if it requires turning up the fan speed to try and throw some out and taking a little bit of loss out the back of the combine, it might not be a bad idea. So.
Okay, so what other management practices can farmers do to maybe combat some of this?
Sure. So, you know, I mentioned earlier on tillage, and that's a word that kind of pains me sometimes to say, but, you know, tillage can be a good thing, and a lot of guys do fall tillage and so forth. You know, and in a case like this, it might not be a bad idea. You know, a lot of guys do run vertical tillage or something like that, just to break up the residue. Anytime you break up residue, you open it up and allow those microbes to break it down. So those microbes can consume the residue, you know, and help eliminate some of that carryover of disease to subsequent years. You know, another thing right off the bat is don't plant soybeans 2 times in a row. You know, most guys don't do that. It's a pretty good rotation around here not to go back-to-back soybeans, but if you're seeing diseases like this in the field with soybeans, don't go back-to-back soybeans with those particular fields. You know, and the other thing on that same topic is picking good varieties. You know, variety selection is extremely important. Maybe searching for something, you know, like our ironclad line of soybeans that have more defensive traits in them that can withstand some of these late-season diseases like frog eye, that have better tolerances to those is a great idea too. So.
Okay, sounds good. Is there anything else you'd like to add this morning?
The other thing I forgot to mention earlier, you know, just on the topic of storage, because I know some guys will store, you know, just based on the situation we're in, commodity prices and everything, and for hopes that it'll get better, you know, down the road. And one thing I'd say, if you do have moldy soybeans and then you go out there and you see mold in the pods, it's a good idea not to store those. I would say, you know, best idea not to. When it comes to corn, a lot of times you can get that moisture content down in the corn. You can drop it, you know, down to 14% or whatever. Get it really dry, and that'll stop that mold growth. But in soybeans, it doesn't really work that way because the soybean itself is roughly 20% oil, 40% protein, 20% oil. So that oil is going to continue to get bad, rancid, and continue to turn. You know, and everybody knows that once you put grain in a bin, it doesn't get better when it comes out. So soybeans most definitely are not going to get better if they've got mold on them. So that would be a big takeaway. If you're thinking about storing and you do see actual mold growth on the beans when you're taking them out,
be a little bit more cautious.
Storage is not a good idea. So.
Okay, sounds good. Well, thank you for joining us this morning.
Welcome.
And thank you to our listeners for tuning in. Have a good day.